relevant kind of opinion articles and newsy items that really get you thinking deeply about specific developmental topics. And the summary notes and the recording from the session will be available there as well. And then the Trialogue Business and Society Handbook is our longest standing knowledge sharing platform. It's where we share insight articles, and the backbone of the publication really is our primary research that we conduct annually with large companies and nonprofit organizations, looking into the state of CSI in South Africa and how both corporates and nonprofits are experiencing the sector and giving or receiving funding. Okay, so you can also join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag CSI webinar, and you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. So just in terms of the flow of the session, I am Zayan Davids. I don't know if I introduced myself up front. I work in the Thought Leadership division of the business, and we have three wonderful panelists today, Nicole Solomon from AECI, Vobo Ngwabe from Barloworld, and Nonkobela Malitza from Volkswagen South Africa. They're going to take us through their corporate approaches to funding nonprofit organizations, and then we'll have a moderated Q&A where I'll be drawing your questions from the Q&A chat box. Okay, so here we have some key findings from the annual research in our that's featured in our Trialogue Business and Society Handbook that I was telling you about. And this specifically looks at CSI expenditure in 2020. So last year, we estimate from extensive research that the total CSI expenditure in the country was 10.7 billion rand. Now, this represents a 4.9% increase from the 10.2 billion that we saw in the previous year in 2019. And it actually also represents just a 1.2% real increase when you take inflation into account. Of the companies that we surveyed, we found that 91% of corporates gave to nonprofit organizations in 2020, with an average of 54% of CSI expenditure going to nonprofit organizations. So of the total 10.7 billion, 54% went to nonprofits. And you may be asking where the rest of the funding went. So government institutions, which includes universities, hospitals, clinics, they received they received 69% so 69% of corporates who were surveyed supported those institutions. And then social enterprises, I know there are a few on the call as well, they were funded by about 1 out of 5 companies, or about 21% of companies that we surveyed. In terms of the most supported development sectors, this doesn't change significantly year on year. There are incremental shifts. Education has consistently proven to be the most well-supported sector by CSI expenditure every single year. It receives around half of CSI expenditure, with social and community development following second year on year. Education was supported by 95% of the companies that we surveyed. And then social and community development, which received 15% of CSI expenditure, was supported by 74% of companies that we surveyed. And then health received 9% of CSI expenditure and was supported by 47% of corporates. Okay, now at this point, I want to launch our second poll, which asks NPOs on the call specifically to share your experience of corporate funding during the pandemic. We know that it's an incredibly challenging climate, and it was before COVID, but what has your experience been like through this period? Thank you, the votes are coming in. And so far, they're certainly not surprising. I'm going to give it just 10 more seconds for you to get your votes in. Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so you'll see that the majority of nonprofit organizations experienced a decrease in corporate funding. And then the corporate funding that remained unaffected and corporate funding that increased are similar, so at 13 and 12% respectively. And then 20% of nonprofit organizations experienced a pause in corporate funding. Thank you for sharing those insights. We'll be able to speak to our panelists as well to get some background information on what the companies have done during this time and are planning to do. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide. So based on our extensive consultations with corporates and then also from our years of research, we have compiled just a quick list of considerations for nonprofit organizations when they're thinking about approaching corporates for funding. And I want to talk to these very quickly before I hand over to our panelists. So this first point speaks to the need to diversify your funder portfolio rather than to rely exclusively on any one funder. This certainly takes the pressure off of existing and then potential funders. And then the second point, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the spray and pray approach, but that really entails preparing one either email or proposal that's pretty standard and sending it to as many companies as you can possibly get contact information for. And then just, so that's the spray, and then just praying or hoping that someone gets back to you. The reality is that the chances of that having any real impact for your organization is very slim. I've spoken to corporate practitioners, CSI practitioners, who have said that they get up to 250 email requests for funding in their inbox a day. I struggle to get through 20 emails, so I can't imagine that anyone gets through 250 thoughtfully. So you'd rather use that time to be thoughtful and strategic about which corporates you approach for funding, and then also how you do that. Try and understand what their interest areas are, what their business agenda is, and how you can tap into that. And then really target your proposals and make them more meaningful so that they have a better chance of being responded to. Number 3, so in our CSI research a few years back, we asked companies which documentation they required before considering funding a nonprofit organization. And we found that over 80% of corporates required proof of Section 18A status, and then almost 3/4 required proof of public benefit organization registration and financial statements. And then half of corporates wanted to know the organization's broad-based Black economic empowerment status before they committed funding. Some other documentation to think about having readily available includes your founding document, your latest annual report, and then also letters of reference. We also found that a few corporates required access for site visits and copies of project plans, so that's also to think about. Number 4, so this speaks to identifying financial and non-financial needs that you can approach companies for support. Of the 10.7 billion rand total estimated CSI expenditure in 2020 that I had mentioned at the top of this, 16% of that total figure was made up of non-cash giving, which includes services, time spent, and then also goods. And so if you take the time to understand the core business and the competencies of the business that you're approaching, you're able to ask for more than just rands and cents. Think about how to include opportunities for businesses to repurpose their goods, to offer their expertise and services, and then also even look at whether the company that you're speaking to has an employee volunteerism program, and are there staff skills that you can draw from to benefit your organization and offer the company an opportunity to develop an employee volunteerism program around your organization. Number 5 is, so again, just emphasizing the importance of understanding the company that you're speaking to, understand what their needs may be. In terms of reciprocity, would they want to have their logo featured on your marketing material or be associated with the good work that you're doing in the organization? Is it recognition that they're after? Is it a more meaningful partnership where they want to understand the work that you're doing? Try and understand how you can develop a reciprocal relationship that'll hopefully turn into a longer term partnership. Then in terms of sharing your track record of funder relations and financial stability, it's of course so useful to be able to reassure companies that you have good budgeting skills and that you have existing relationships with funders or previous funders where the relationships were good and solid. Number 7 speaks to monitoring and evaluation. Be able to tell the story about how your organization approaches monitoring and evaluation, so how you're able to draw on the data and insight to, very importantly, improve your programming. How do you close the feedback loop where you're making sure that the communities that you're serving and conducting the monitoring and evaluation with are able to benefit from the process as well, and then also be open to adapting to the needs of the corporate. So they may have a monitoring and evaluation framework that they would want you to respond to. 8 speaks to show how you are driving lead practice and thought leadership. So are you either looking at best practice in the sector that you're working in, or in fact, part of developing that best practice? Tell that story importantly. Then commit to required reporting, transparency and accountability, and build factors as the last point into your proposal that would contribute to a smooth exit. I know it's uncomfortable to think about funding being withdrawn at the start point where you're actually just asking for the funding, but it does help to show that your organization won't completely have to dissolve if a funder pulls out. It takes, again, to the point of taking the pressure off of potential funders and existing funders so that they know that you have some sort of sustainability plan. Okay, and now before I hand over to our panelists, I'm going to launch the 3rd poll. It's our last poll for the day. And this is directed at the corporates on the call. It is a multiple choice question. And we're asking companies what the 3 most important things are that they look for when considering partnering with an NPO. I'm going to give it a few more seconds for these votes to come in. Thank you to everyone who's participating. Okay. 2 more seconds. Thank you, everyone. Let's share these results. So proven impact, speaking to the M&E considerations as well. 79% of companies look for proven impact in the organizations that they're working with. So as much as there are so many nonprofit organizations doing incredible work in this country, how are you able to show that impact as well? Think about how you tell your story. Alignment of organizational focus comes in second, and then financial standing and existing corporate support is a big one as well. Ethical leadership coming in strong, transparency coming in strong. Thank you very much. We'll include these results in our feedback to you as well. Okay, great. So we've gotten to the case study section of this session. I want to invite all our panelists to turn on their cameras and to unmute themselves, please, at this point. Hi, Bobo. Hi, Nicole. Hello, Nkopela. Okay, everyone. I'm going to hand over to Nicole Solomon, the Group CSI Manager from AECI first, to share with us her company's approach to funding nonprofit organizations, particularly during this challenging time. Nicole, over to you.
Thanks, Zion, and welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for having me this morning. I think I'm in a privileged position that I was once a fundraiser, and now I'm in the grant making, giving space. So I do understand the circumstances of sitting on both sides of the table. And so I'd like to open up by saying that at AECI, for us, an ideal credible nonprofit partner eventually becomes part of our stakeholder group and part of our family. It's a partner that looks at solving national development imperatives. So we wouldn't typically look at someone that's, solving matters or causes that are not related to where the country is moving and what the country is looking to aspire and achieve. That's important for us when we look at a nonprofit organization. And for me, what would be important is when I look at nonprofit partners is somebody that has moved away from the tactical approach to more strategic. Now, what do I mean by that? It's an organization that has the ability to align their strategy with that of the business and align their cause with our core business. It's important for us to have a look at that and looking at how we can solve long-term impact together. I think for me, true transformation is being able to impact someone's life when they're able to empower themselves and others. So we look at a cause that's not only sort of just a hands out, but it's a hand up. It's the ability to restore the economic dignity of someone and take them from where they are to a better place where they are empowered and they are willing to empower and they're in a place to empower others. That's really what we look for when we look at credible partners and the causes that they are involved in. A typical example for us would be, we're in the chemical industry, we do chemistry, so math, science, STEM related projects would be something that's a no-brainer in our education portfolio. But I want to take it back to the poll, but where all the corporates said that it's important for us to see that you can demonstrate impact. So when I look at a proposal, a funding proposal, and it's just saying, we do maths and science. And then so what? It really is about how do you demonstrate impact. So we've managed to produce so many bachelor's passes and enabled so many people all through these STEM skills. We've changed the person's life and enabled them to access tertiary education, to finish, their high school education and empower them to have the skills to access the work market. I think an example for me when we talk about long-term partnerships is looking at scarce skills in the country and something as simple as plumbing skills. In KZN, we took a group of women and we empowered them through plumbing skills. Now, you would never take a female and typically, empower them through plumbing. But it's a core, a plumber these days charge more than a doctor, believe it or not, in their hourly rates. These artisan skills are highly sought after. And so we equip these women through a skill. Number one, it started there. We then, through the program, the partner we worked with, empowered them further in terms of governance, business acumen, etc. They formed a business and they're now solving all the leaking and plumbing issues in their very community for money, for funding. They've developed a funding model that funding that comes in is generated back into the nonprofit to sustain itself. So to me, it's demonstrating that these people have a long-term plan in mind. They're not solely dependent just on AECI's funding, but have an exit strategy in the next short to medium term, couple of years. And what was even more fascinating is that we were able to migrate this project from socioeconomic support to enterprise development support within the business. And that to me really showed, the long-term partnerships we were able to create with this organization. And so for me, if you had the ability to demonstrate crowdfunding ability, that not only one AECI would be the sole funder of the project, but Barloworld can come on. In the CSI space, we really don't fight for branding space. It's about the common cause. So we are really not in the space of, oh no, we don't want to get involved. If the cause aligns with us and it addresses our strategy, and you have demonstrated you've brought other partners on board, ever more so better to further drive the project. and demonstrate your value. I think it's important to show there's a return on investment. It's not just a transactional relationship, but how is partnering with us different to anyone else? So think about your competitive advantage in terms of your project. And then if I could give any of the members on the webinar some tips, what I look for, obviously credibility, reputation, brand, your goodwill, impact and outcomes, previous donor history, governance, management, sound management, robust reporting, impact, looking at change, all the very lovely things that's already been mentioned. And I think you guys know that.
Nicole, I'm going to thank you very much. That list is comprehensive and there's a lot. You've touched on very interesting and important points, particularly I liked your point around collaboration across corporates versus being competitive in this space. It's an interesting one to pick up on as well, but you mentioned a lot there, so thank you. We'll get into the detail of that after we've gone through the introductions. I do want to hand it over to Vovo Nkwabe from Barloworld to share your company's approach.
Thank you very much, Zian, and welcome to everybody on the call. At Barloworld, CSI funding is twofold. We've got a larger footprint. So the local businesses, they fund what is local around their sphere. At corporate level, where I sit, we are interested in funding programs that are national, so you have to operate in more than one province, that is in terms of your program. And what I would like to highlight is the focus areas for Barloworld. We focus a lot on education like everybody else. And then what we focus on is youth development initiatives, as well as issues of environmental stewardship. From a program point of view, I think the survey points a lot to what everybody is looking for. But what I want to highlight for us, governance is very key in terms of how you are structured. You need to have a founding statement, your board, and you need to keep minutes for that. And then also, what problem are you solving? Because we are a grant making, therefore we understand that a community has to thrive. Therefore, what is it that you are solving for in that particular community? I think to my colleague, in terms of the National Development Plan, you need to make sure that you align yourself with what the country is trying to solve for. Having said that, I wanted to highlight the issues of national development. We've partnered with an organization that has managed to triangulate student, vacation work together with the problem that were happening in the municipalities vis-a-vis the infrastructure program, where they don't understand what infrastructure challenges they have. So this particular program, what it did do is make sure that the municipality understands their infrastructure. It's the drainage system infrastructure. I think we all know the challenges that impact the local municipalities in terms of unspent budgets. So to that extent, it talks to issues of capacity, but also it talks to issues of lack of expertise within the system. Therefore, this particular partner that we had was managed to partner with the University of UCT, the municipality and ourselves and other corporates to make sure that that municipality has a register, for instance, of their own infrastructure. Those projects can be replicated in other municipalities. So that's what we look for as well. In terms of replicability of your program, can it be replicated in other spaces? But I think I also want to point out to say, we have a footprint. Barloworld represents different brands. For instance, we represent Avis. We also represent equipment. So naturally, we would fall back in terms of the type of focus area and strategy of Barloworld. So we likely are to fund issues that are, STEM in terms of high school. But post-matric, we're also looking to do issues of teacher development. Look, there are risks associated with funding. So how do we mitigate those risks? We do those site visits. In terms of that, apart from what you've submitted, we do go, if we're interested in supporting you, We do the site visits. Obviously, I think it has been mentioned in the call that you have to have a registration as a PBO because we need to require that section 18A. However, I think because all issues of community development dovetail themselves to the BE transformation agenda, the Commission is mainly interested to know whose life have you touched. So for us as an intermediary or as an organization, you also need to prove your impact in terms of who are your beneficiaries necessarily, so that you are also able to track your impact and therefore our impact. I think what else I need to share? Yeah, so it's twofold. We've got a localized element where you talk to our businesses, and at the center, you have to operate in more than one province. Diane, I think I'll turn over to you. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Fobo. Thank you for emphasizing the need to respond to national and local needs urgently. And yeah, you've touched on triangulation and our organization's ability to do that. So thank you. We'll pick that back up. Nonkobela Malitza from Volkswagen, South Africa, joining us from Uitenhage. Please share your corporate approach to funding nonprofits.
Okay, thank you, Z, and thanks to Trialogue for the invitation, and morning to everybody on the webinar. So, I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said by the previous panelists, but to add on to that, just from a Volkswagen point of view, we have a very strategic approach to corporate social investment. So we focus on really 5 areas. Okay, so we focus on education and youth development, but 85% of our budget goes to education and youth development, and the rest goes to community health and well-being, which is where we do our NGO support, and then we do a little bit of employee volunteerism as well, which is also addressing that area and local economic development. But in terms of our guiding principles, we've really adopted, like I said, a very strategic long-term approach versus an ad hoc short-term donation approach. So within education, for instance, which is our, we've got a legacy initiative, which is around making sure that all learners in the greater Uitenhage area are functionally literate by the time they're 10 years old. So this is our big initiative around education, and this is where the bulk of our education funding goes. I mean, we still do other things. We do bursaries, we do tertiary funding, but we focus, and because we've got a 10-year vision around that, because we're hoping that in 10 years, we will have gone some way in terms of agreeing. So it's a holistic approach. And we do this end to end. It doesn't only start at the early childhood centers, but it also works with teachers in the classroom, communities, with teachers, with parents. So it's really end to end. And we work with partners who are experts, Rhodes University, other academics, because we are not technical experts. And then to some extent, we also work with the Department of Education. So that's really an example of the approach that we take in terms of our CSI. So there's very limited funding that's left for ad hoc donations to NGOs. Where we do donations to NGOs, we really try to focus on multi-year general operating support as opposed to once-off piecemeal donations. So we would identify an NGO whose impact or social return on investment is very clear to us, all right, and that we agree with, and whose execution and implementation we believe is the best, or benchmark, or even better than that, and where we can really see that the work they're doing, and we give them generalized operating support to make them grow from strength to strength. The problem with that is that, I mean, we still are a corporate, and when you give multi-year generalized operating support, it's difficult to have attribution to the corporate, which, I mean, it's not a nice thing to say, but sometimes we do need to kind of be able to say, that we gave this money for this purpose, and this is what it achieved. So when it comes to choosing NGOs to partner with, a clear theory of change is very, very important for us. We need to know, what is the problem you're solving? How are you solving for it? What is the evidence that you've gathered that your methodology or the way that you're doing it will work? What are the impacts, both short-term and long-term. We want to satisfy ourselves that there's minimal waste, you know, in the operations, okay? We want to see that there's accountability, in other words, that you're able to explain your actions, okay? You're committed to explaining your actions, both the good and the bad, and your learnings, and that you are learning and growing from strength to strength all the time, and that you're willing to share that with us. And we also want to see transparency, that you're really willing to share critical data about your organization, because that's the only way we can be satisfied that you know, you're growing, that you're not just staying in one place. Philosophically, we also try, I mean, unfortunately, we live in a country that there's so many needs that we can't respond only to need, because if you only respond to need or respond to need only, you will not be able to make lasting change, and your impact will always be short-term and kind of ad hoc. Yeah. Now, having said that, we also do want to be responsive and relevant. So obviously, we when there's a, you know, an immediate need, like in the case of a disaster, or in the case of something like the, you know, COVID-19 pandemic, that, or any kind of other disaster, we do try to be responsive to that and respond accordingly. Sometimes, I mean, needs sometimes, even if they're short term, need to be addressed, and where we can, we do that. But that's a very small part of the way we work. Yeah, so like I was saying, yeah, we also work very much in partnership and collaboration, particularly for scalability, okay? So we like to collaborate with other funders, with government, to increase the scale. So once we've satisfied ourselves that what we're doing does have the required, you know, the desired impact, the next step is then to scale it in a particular community. And that's when partners and collaboration becomes really critical, because we can't do everything on our own. So yeah, in terms of, I think I've mentioned what we really look for. Yeah, and then the compliance and governance issues from NGOs. Obviously, we do look for Section 18A status, tax registration, you know, yeah, we need to trust management and leadership, right? We need, because without trust, we don't, there's no basis for partnership. We don't want to be that, that funder that's always wanting for more reports, more information, and having these discussions that are uncomfortable. So trust is paramount in an NGO relationship. And of course, we do conduct site visits, some planned and some unplanned, just to really see what is really happening on the ground. And it's also, it's not about monitoring or policing, but it's really to see what is really happening. So we can also learn from the process. So yes, I pause there.
Thank you very much, Nkobela. We've got just about 20 minutes left for questions that are rolling in. I want to remind all delegates, to direct your questions to the Q&A box and not to the chat box. Nkobela, you ended us off with your intro. I actually want to start with you for the first question. The question comes from Andrew Sitole, and he asks about how you make sure that you alert or invite NGOs in the youth space to submit applications. I want to expand on that a little bit more. So if you can talk to how you select the nonprofits that you partner with longer term to create that long-term impact, systemic change that you talk about. How, and then also on the ad hoc side of your funding, how do you identify or invite nonprofits to apply for funding? Nkobela, you're on mute. Thank you.
So, I mean, all nonprofits are welcome to write to us directly, Volkswagen Community Trust or Volkswagen, and just submit an application or a request for funding. That is normally followed up. I mean, we're quite responsive. We will tell you if, you know, the request falls within our mandate, you know, the areas that we're looking in, and then we'll ask you for further information, depending on the quality of the information that you've given us. And then what we generally, now, I have to be honest about this. Whilst we have a national footprint and we try to be, you know, to follow the footprint of our corporate and be in all provinces, it's impossible for us to be equally represented in all provinces. So we're very dominant in the Eastern Cape, simply because that's where our head office is. And we happen to be one of the largest corporate investors in the Eastern Cape, and there are not many others. And as everybody knows, the Eastern Cape is one of the, from a social development point of view, there are lots of needs there. So we really have a very strong footprint there in the Eastern Cape, and in particular around the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro. And but then we also do work outside of that. And then we also have a quite dominant, not dominant, but we have a strong footprint in Gauteng. We then also have some projects and some investments in the Free State and in the Northwestern Mpumalanga, but very little elsewhere. So I do want to be clear about that. We can't be in all places because we do have finite resources. So that's one. And like I said, so if you're in education, and in particular in the first 10 years of life, which is our main focus, that's where we're looking at. And then in youth development, yeah, we're very strong in youth development. And in youth development, it's really very much about connections to economic opportunity. That's what we're focusing on. How do we address the issue of youth unemployment, which is such a complex issue? But what are you doing? And it's beyond just skills. Everybody's doing skills training. We know that that's not the only solution to the youth unemployment issue. So we're looking for really innovative, grounded solutions or projects around that are based on strong evidence of success.
So I want to pick up on your commentary around youth development and actually questions coming in on the from delegates. Just to speak to, so you've all spoken to your support of the education sector in various ways. I think through the pandemic, the issue of, I see Geraldine calling it softer skills, but Najib Ibrahim calling it, so naming it. So talking about the mental health, psychosocial support requirements that are needed during this time, especially, it's been emphasized. Nicole, if I can direct this question to you and ask you how you think about supporting education skills development programming holistically, incorporating the psychosocial element, especially looking at the fact that it takes longer to see impact in this regard. I think, okay, can I hand that over to you?
Thanks, Zee. Very good question and very relevant. I think it would be a miss of corporates to think that giving somebody just bursary funding or access to tuition is giving them access to education. If that's what some corporates are, limiting it to, then it's not looking at the holistic enablers to be able to enable somebody to access education. You've got people who don't have access to drinking water, who have to walk buckets, sometimes missing school. So at AECI, we look at that holistic view. We look at water and food security in education. In some of the youth skills development programs, you have somebody that's now got an ability to access a TVET college, but his stipend doesn't allow for him to travel as far as, from the college to there. And we make a plan to enable, because you're setting up the person to fail. You're really not going to enable it. And that includes issues around mental wellness, social psycho issues. If it's picked up at the institution and it's raised with us and it's within our means to provide support for it, it's definitely something we would look at.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, and then Vovo, and I'm sorry to be moving through this quite quickly, but we are pressed for time. Vovo, so there is a question from Angela Kimani, who's from the Sibikwa Arts Center, and she asks about the arts and creative industries specifically. She says that there's a gap in communication or understanding in between the corporate sector and arts. So there's a lot of emphasis, as our research shows, on supporting education, health, and social development. But in terms of the existing, specifically the pressures put on the arts industry through COVID, how can corporate funding respond to this? And does your company engage it at all?
Okay, so I think, yeah, from a CSI point of view, we are governed by the trust dates. So it's pretty much prescriptive in terms of what is it that we respond to. So for us to actually venture into the creative arts industry becomes an issue that we need to then revise our founding statement. But also, so what we've done is we've created a different pocket. We've got at Barloworld, we've just launched something that's called Barloworld Mbeu, which is a social enterprise vehicle. There we did factor in the issues of arts and creative industry. So we do respond to that at that level. And the application, we do go to the market annually to call out for application. And I think the applications are going to open now in April. So you need to follow our social media platform as well as our in terms of that particular application. I hope I've answered Angeline's question. But I think there was, I just want to add on the issues of the response to COVID. Look, the funding for CSI is dependent on the profitability of businesses. So if the business makes profit, then we're able to have funding for the coffers to respond to community issues. For us, it's not a budget. It's a question of we have to get some funding from the business after they've made their own profit. If there's no profit, it then makes the funding very reduced. So therefore, by extension, what we respond to is going to be reduced. But because we commit for a longer period with an NGO that we support, so it makes it easier to communicate with that particular NGO that, look, this is our challenge currently. So we're going to maybe reduce the spend for you at this particular juncture. And then looking ahead, depending on what happens in the future, then we are able, so those relationships for me are key. Thank you, Zian.
Thanks very much, Fobo. We've got about 12 minutes left. I want to go through the panel, starting with Nonkobela, and then Nicole, and then Fobo, to just ask you for, if you could, and I know this is a big, tough one, but if you could leave nonprofit organizations with just one key piece of advice when they think about corporate funding, because we've mentioned quite a number of issues here. What are the issues that you would really have them take away from this session? Nonkobela, if I can start with you.
Yeah, for me, really, it's that impact. You know, what is your theory of change? How? And I mean, we all know there's unemployment. We all know, but so it's got to go beyond that. It's to say, this is the particular problem that I'm trying to solve, and this is how I'm going, and this is how my organization or my initiative is going to address it. And you've got to show us evidence that this has been researched, that there's some track record, if possible, or there's some way of measuring concretely, objectively, that impact over time. All right, and a willingness maybe to learn from, you know, from practice on the ground and from others, what others have done. In other areas, in other locations in the same area. That's, you know, so some kind of depth of knowledge, because we are not practitioners, we're not experts in the field. So we're looking to partner. If you're an NGO and you're trying to solve a problem, we want you to be the expert on the problem to some extent, and therefore have expertise on the issue. That it's very, yeah. So for me, that's really impact. That's really, really very important. And I just want to foreground an issue around social enterprises right now, you know, and social entrepreneurship amongst young people. I mean, I think that's an area that, there's a lot of opportunity, and I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. We really are looking for projects and initiatives that are for young people, maybe run by young people, that will address the local entrepreneurship and economic development issues in communities. I think there are lots of opportunities for that, and we're really looking for leadership and expertise, and people who are willing to really invest time and expertise in that area, because I think it's going to be one of the critical solutions to some of the key problems that we are facing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Nicole, your one piece of advice to nonprofits.
Well, one piece is difficult for me, but so here I go. Start with your why. What is your purpose? Stay true to your why. It's your purpose that will keep you on that true north path and will not let you deviate from that. And the research has shown that organizations with purpose have a lot more strategic outcomes in the long term. What's your value to your stakeholders, not only to your beneficiaries, but to your donors as well? Articulate that very clearly and make sure that you demonstrate it. There's no quick fix. You have to do in the research, you have to do the grant mapping, you have to do the engagement. And when I say engagement, I don't say communicate. If you've sent an email, you've actually just communicated. So when I say engagement is when you engage with people in a hand, heart, and head space. So when somebody knows about it, they are touched by what you do and they are driven to action. That for me is true engagement. And then I just want to tell everybody on the call, I admire what you're doing. Everybody on this call is trying to drive a better cause for the advancement of the country. So don't ever forget that and stay true to what you've decided to do to impact change. And leave you with Winston Churchill's quote to say that we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give.
Thank you. And thank you for recognizing the hard work of the nonprofit organizations. I think there's such an interesting issue around power dynamics when it comes to corporates funding nonprofits. The nonprofits feel as though they're the beneficiaries from the corporates, but really your partners working together to address national issues, as Vovo spoke to earlier. And Nkqubela, similarly, just to speak to the fact that you recognize that nonprofits are leaders and experts on the issues that they're addressing. I think that's very important for nonprofits to hear very clearly. Vovo, your last piece of advice. You're unmute, Vovo.
Sorry, thank you, Zian. For me, is responsiveness. So what I mean by that is we all have our specialties in terms of I'm doing education, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. When it's time, there's a disaster in your local community, be flexible to respond to that particular need. I mean, we've had cases of fire in Cape Town, besides the pandemic, issues of, the hurricane that happened. And then the people that we support are not reaching us and they're telling us they are in that particular locality. For me, it's an indictment on all of us. You can't be in that particular local community and doing a cause. And then when there's a disaster, you are missing in action. You know, you need to be active, one, and make sure that you consult with your stakeholders. What I mean by that is don't bring a solution to a local community. Make sure that it's what they need. And then when you come for funding or request for funding, make sure that it's something that you yourself can fund. You know, it's one thing to ask for funding from others. Will you be able to fund that particular project if there's no funding elsewhere? So those are the key things that that I would like to part with in terms of the call. But above everything else, it's compliance. You know, like make sure your governance structure is correct. Make sure that you are registered as a PBO, and all those other issues that are nice. And also the accountability in terms of going back to your stakeholder or your funder in terms of reporting what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vovo. So just to recap on the key pieces of advice, Nkqubela asks, what is your impact? Be able to tell that story. Nicole Solomon asks about your organizational purpose, really understanding your why. And then I also want to emphasize the difference that you identified between communication versus actual engagement. It's an important one to continue to think about. And then Vovo, responsiveness, ability to self-fund, creative funding, and compliance. Thank you for those parting thoughts. There are a number of questions that we weren't able to get to in this session. We're going to send it to the panelists via email and ask them to take a few minutes to respond to it via email, and then we'll get back to you. We do have delegates' contact details, so we're able to respond to you and send the answers to your specific questions directly, just to make sure that we are able to keep time. And then I want to just give thanks to everyone involved in the session. So the panelists, thank you for your invaluable insight. It's a difficult time for everyone, and your insight has been meaningful and useful, and I'm sure so appreciated. So thank you for taking the time out. To my colleagues who are working very hard, very hard behind the scenes, Kumo pressing all the right buttons, Kathy, Ruin, Fiona for writing the session up. Thank you for your hard work behind the scenes. As I have mentioned, we will make the summary notes, the presentation and the recording of this session available to you. We'll send it to you via email, and then we'll also make it available on the Trialogue Knowledge Hub. So please go to www.trialogueknowledgehub.co.za to access that. Again, please complete the feedback survey. You can recommend topics that you want to learn more about in future sessions like these. And then also a reminder to sign up for our conference. It's going to be dynamic and interactive and engaging. We've got some really interesting topics. Nicole, you spoke to the purpose of organizations. That's a key theme in our conference, and so it'll give you a great opportunity to really unpack issues within the purpose-driven organization space. And then lastly, to say that we appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining this call, and please everyone do